Some men spend their whole lives building something. Matthew Lyon spent 23 years building an empire and about 4 hours destroying it. And my wife, Cassie, she didn't even break a sweat. Welcome to Real's Dad Truth. Before we continue with today's story, please take a moment to support us by giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us and gives us the motivation to bring you more powerful and emotional stories every single day. We would also love to hear your thoughts. Please share your feelings, opinions, or reactions in the comments below, and don't forget to include the hashtag #RealsDadTruth. Thank you so much for being here, for listening, and for becoming a part of our story-loving community. My name is Liam Smith. I'm a venture capitalist. Not the startup bro with a kombucha addiction and a vision board covered in Elon quotes kind, but the kind who has quietly co-signed the growth of 3 of the top 10 fastest growing companies in the country over the last decade. I don't do press. I don't do panels. I don't post LinkedIn essays at 6 a.m. about disruption in the future of capital. I show up. I read the numbers. I ask the questions nobody else thought to ask, and then I write the check or I don't. I've been doing this long enough to know that the most dangerous person in any room is never the loudest one. I learned that mostly from my wife. I met Cassie when she was 26 and buried in a double major. Finance and mathematics at a university that attracts the kind of students who eat problem sets for breakfast and argue about regression models for fun. She was the only person in a 400-level econometric seminar who caught a calculation error in the professor's own published paper. And not just caught it. She corrected him 3 sentences quietly, politely. The kind of correction that makes the entire room go absolutely silent because everyone realizes simultaneously that the smartest person present just changed. I was a guest lecturer that semester. I kept finding excuses to come back. I proposed 8 months later on a Tuesday, which she still gives me grief about because apparently proposing on a Tuesday is logistically inconsiderate. She said yes anyway. Cassie doesn't look like what people expect. She wears reading glasses. She's always losing. I found them in the freezer twice, once in a flower pot and once sitting on top of her own head while she tore the house apart looking for them. She prefers flats, sensible ones. She ties her hair up when she's thinking, which is basically always. And she laughs at the wrong parts of movies with this completely unself-conscious honesty that I have never once gotten tired of. She makes the best beef stew you have ever tasted in your natural life. I'm talking the kind of stew that makes you reconsider everything you thought you knew about what a Tuesday night could be. She is also the most quietly, lethally intelligent person I have ever met, and I've been in rooms with Nobel laureates. She works by choice, entirely by choice, as a senior financial analyst at Leon Capital. Not because we need the income, because Cassie is constitutionally incapable of coasting. She wanted something that was hers, separate from my world and my name and my reputation. Something she built from the ground up with her own mind. We talked about it before she took the job, and I understood it completely. She's proud that way. Not arrogant. Proud. There's a difference. And Cassie has always known exactly where that line is. Matthew Lyon knew none of this. Or maybe he knew pieces of it and decided they didn't matter. Which, if anything, is a more spectacular kind of stupid. He was about to get an education, the expensive kind. I found out about the invitation on a Tuesday evening. Cassie set it on the kitchen counter next to my coffee mug with the particular careful placement that I've learned. Over 20 years means look at this, but don't react yet. Cream envelope, embossed gold seal, heavy cardstock, the kind that costs more per sheet than most people's lunch. The Lyon Capital Annual Investment Gala black tie. You are cordially invited. I picked it up. Read it once. Read it again. This is addressed to you, I said. I noticed. She was already at the kitchen table, flipping through a folder with the focused efficiency of someone who has 17 things happening in her brain simultaneously. Cassie. I waited until she looked up over her glasses. Leon invited you to his gala. His gala? The one I've been trying to get into for 3 years as an investor. I set the envelope down, picked it back up. That's his flagship event. Every major fund manager on the Eastern Seaboard comes through that room. Half the names on the Forbes list send someone. This is why did he invite you? She was quiet for a moment, not hesitant, just measuring her words the way she always does, assembling them into something precise before she releases them. He did it in front of everyone in the Monday morning briefing, she said finally. Full staff. He made this big show of it, slid the envelope across the conference table like he was doing me a royal favor, said, and I quote, I suppose even our analysts deserve a night out once in a while. She turned to Paige. People laughed. Jones laughed the loudest. Rita looked at the floor. Lyon looked very pleased with himself. I put my coffee down slowly. Something in my chest was doing a thing I didn't entirely like. He said that in front of the whole team, in front of 12 people and the intern. And then what? She glanced up. He told Callum afterward. I was around the corner. He didn't see me. That he'd bet $1,000 I'd either show up in something from a discount rack or not show up at all. A pause. He said it would be funny either way. He placed a bet. Liam. He placed an actual bet on whether my wife would embarrass herself at Liam. She looked at me with that specific expression. Level measured. Faintly amused. The one that means I have already processed this and formulated a response, and you need to trust me. I handled it. I opened my mouth, closed it. What does handled it mean? She went back to her folder. You'll see. I didn't know what she meant. I turned it over in my head for 3 weeks while she came home from work every day. Like nothing was different while she answered my questions about the gala with a single word each time. While she went about her evenings with the serene patience of someone who has already watched a film and knows exactly how it ends. I wouldn't understand what she meant until I watched Matthew Lyon freeze at his own podium in front of 800 people and walk off his own stage. But I'll get there. Here's what you need to know about Matthew Lyon. He's 61, silver-haired in the distinguished way that certain men spend a lot of money maintaining. He has the handshake of a man who read a book about handshakes in 1987 and never updated his approach. Firm to the edge of aggression, 2 pumps, eye contact that goes just slightly over your left shoulder like he's already looking for someone more important. He's worth somewhere north of $4.2 billion depending on which quarter's Forbes you're reading and how generous the valuation methodology is. He built Leon Capital over 2 decades through a combination of genuinely shrewd early bets on infrastructure technology, one extremely fortunate marriage to a woman whose family had been in private equity since before Leon knew what private equity was, and a remarkable talent for surrounding himself with people significantly smarter than him and then absorbing their best ideas like they were always his own. He's the kind of man who gives a toast at his own charity dinner and somehow turns it into a 15-minute story about himself. He's the kind of man who calls junior analysts kid well into their 30s and has never once in his career learned an assistant's last name. He collects impressiveness the way some men collect watches, not because he loves the craft, but because he needs people to see him wearing it. He is also, as I have now had extensive professional and personal occasion to document, a petty, small-hearted bully who cannot tolerate being corrected. The Monday morning before the invitation appeared on my kitchen counter, Cassie had been in a full team briefing when Leon presented his Q3 market estimation. It was a significant number, the kind that would anchor investment decisions, get quoted in partner communications, potentially make its way into public F-facing materials. And it was wrong. Not catastrophically wrong, not fraudulently wrong, but meaningfully wrong. The kind of error that happens when you're working from a flawed assumption 3 steps back in the model, and if you don't know where to look, you'll never find it. Cassie found it in about 4 minutes. She knows where to look. She raised her hand, which I should say takes a kind of professional courage in a room where you are the only woman and the youngest person present and the room has already decided your ceiling. And she walked Leon through it, not showy, not with any edge. Just here's the figure. Here's where the model diverges. Here's the corrected number. 3 minutes tops. She even framed it as a question first to give him room to catch it himself. She was, as she always is, trying to help. Leon said, "That's one way to look at it," in a tone that made clear he thought it was not, in fact, a way to look at it. He was wrong about that, too, because Cassie's number turned out to be right. He quietly updated the estimation in the partner communication 2 days later with no acknowledgement and no correction visible, like it had always been right, like he'd seen it himself. But he remembered. Men like Matthew Lyon always remember being corrected. And they remember it the way other people remember being insulted, deep and specific and waiting. So he sent the invitation. He made the joke in front of 12 colleagues. He placed the bet with his cronies. He set up the performance review in his calendar for 3 weeks after the gala. I found that out later, too, from Jones with a note that read, "Start building exit case for CS." He thought he was orchestrating something, a little private humiliation, a reminder of the natural order of rooms like his. He had absolutely no idea that the natural order of rooms like his was about to get a very thorough reorganization. The 3 weeks between the invitation and the gala passed in the way that time passes before something significant, slightly too slowly, with an undercurrent of electricity that I couldn't name. Cassie was calm, disturbingly, magnificently calm. She went to work. She came home. She cooked dinner, called her mother, rewatched a documentary about migratory birds she'd already seen twice, and declined to tell me anything specific about what handled it meant. I asked Ellie. Ellie is Cassie's best friend since college, and she is one of those people who exists at the precise intersection of fierce loyalty and theatrical flair. She once showed up to a friend's terrible breakup with a bottle of champagne and the complete works of Nora Ephron, and somehow this was exactly right. She is also professionally one of the more talented stylists working today. She has dressed 3 Oscar nominees, 2 Grammy winners, and a sitting senator's wife at a state dinner. She does not discuss this. She just does it. When I asked her what she knew, she looked at me with great patience and said, "Liam, honey, you're going to have to wait like everyone else. She's my wife. She's my best friend, and she told me not to tell you." Ellie smiled. "So, how about that weather?" I was apparently the only person in this scenario who did not have full information. This is, Cassie would later point out, largely the point. The night of the gala arrived on a Friday in October. The city had that particular autumn crispness that makes Manhattan feel like it's showing off. I came home early, ironed my shirt, fought with my cufflinks for longer than I will admit, and went to find Cassie. She was in the chair by the vanity in our bedroom. Ellie was there, had apparently been there for 2 hours working with the focused intensity of someone conducting surgery. There were products and tools I cannot name arranged on the dresser with military precision. And there was the dress. I stopped in the doorway. I have been married to this woman for 19 years. I have seen her in everything from a hospital gown to the gown she wore at our wedding, and I have thought she was beautiful in all of it, genuinely without performing it. But this was something different. The dress was black, which is the only simple thing about it. It moved like water and held like architecture. It sat on her like it had been designed with knowledge of her posture, her collarbone, the exact angle of her shoulder when she's thinking. It probably had a name. It probably had a history. Ellie had almost certainly called in a favor worth more than my car. "You look," I started. "Don't make it weird," Cassie said without turning from the mirror. "I'm not making it weird. You've got the face." "What face?" "The one you make at the end of that one commercial. The one with the dog and the I don't cry at that commercial." Ellie made a sound that was very clearly a suppressed laugh. "I don't," I said to no one in particular. Cassie turned around. She looked at me in that way. She has full direct, a slight tilt of the head. "You ready? Are you?" She picked up her clutch. "I've been ready for 3 weeks." We rode to the Harrington Grand in comfortable silence. Good silence. The kind built from 2 decades of proximity to another person. The kind where you don't need to fill space because the space itself is yours together. At one point, she reached over without looking up from her phone and fixed my pocket square with 2 efficient movements. I didn't say anything. I just drove and thought about the fact that somewhere on the 42nd floor of the Harrington Grand, Matthew Lyon was probably on his 2nd scotch and his 4th self-congratulatory story. Feeling very settled in his certainty about how the night would go, I thought. Enjoy the next 45 minutes, Matthew. The Harrington Grand's 42nd floor is the kind of room that exists to remind you where you sit in the architecture of money. Floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides. The city spread out below like something that belongs to you personally. 800 guests in black tie, every one of them trailing the low-frequency hum of Syria's capital. The air smells like expensive candles and ambition, and just a little bit of anxiety masked as confidence, which is the cologne of high net worth social events everywhere. We had timed our arrival deliberately, 45 minutes late. Leon's keynote was scheduled for 8. It was 7:52 when we handed our invitation to the attendant at the door. She scanned it, started to say the standard welcome, looked at Cassie, looked specifically at the dress, looked back up, stepped aside with a kind of reflex courtesy that the dress commanded entirely on its own. The main hall doors were open. I put my hand at the small of Cassie's back. She didn't hesitate. She never hesitates. That's one of the 10,000 things I love about her. Matthew Lyon was mid-sentence. I know this precisely because Jones found me at the bar an hour later and described it in the detailed, slightly traumatized way that people described witnessing something they didn't expect to witness. Lyon was working through a point about capital allocation in emerging markets. The 3rd time he'd made essentially the same point, Jones noted, reformulated in slightly different language each time, like he thought repetition was emphasis when the change in the room's energy started. It wasn't loud. It was a current. The kind that moves through a crowd the way a rumor does, table by table, person by person, until it reaches the front and arrives fully formed. A shift in attention, next turning. The low collective recalibration of 800 people redirecting their focus. Lion paused. He looked up from his notes. The crowd between the entrance and the podium had parted just slightly, the way crowds do when they're responding to something without quite knowing they're doing it. A magnetic thing. A pull toward whoever just walked in, who clearly belongs at the front of every room they enter. And there was Cassie moving through unhurried, touching my arm at something, nodding to a woman who apparently recognized her from somewhere. The dress doing what the dress did, which was make every other garment in the room suddenly feel like it had been trying too hard. And me beside her in the tuck she had picked out 3 months ago for a different event and insisted I keep pressed because she had said at the time, "You never know." Lion saw her first. The frown came first. The squint of someone trying to locate context for something they're seeing. Then recognition, slow and reluctant. That's my analyst. That's the woman eye, the calculation urgent and unsuccessful. And then the paler, the actual physical draining of color from the face of a man who has in the span of approximately 3 seconds understood the full architecture of what he has done. I have seen that face in boardrooms. I have seen it across negotiating tables. I have seen it on the faces of men who thought they had a better hand than they did right at the moment the cards turn. Matthew Lyon sat down his note cards. He stepped back from the podium. Mr. Leon, the moderator, a thin man named Davis, who would spend the rest of the evening looking like he needed a drink, leaned forward. "Sir, did you want to?" Matthew Lyon said nothing. He picked up nothing. He walked off the stage directly into the wings, and he did not come back. The room erupted, not loudly. This is a room full of people who have trained themselves not to react visibly to things that astonish them, because visible astonishment signals that you weren't already aware. And in rooms like this, you're always supposed to already be aware. But the whispering was immediate and total. 800 people in 17 simultaneous conversations, all pointing the same direction. Cassie sat down at table 7. She smoothed her dress. She picked up the menu card and read it with the focused calm of someone who has been waiting for a train that she knew was coming. I sat down beside her. "You want wine?" A few people stopped by the table. Some who knew me professionally, one who apparently knew Cassie from a conference years back and lit up to see her. We had a perfectly pleasant 45 minutes while Matthew Lyon somewhere behind a curtain presumably contemplated his choices. And then Jones appeared at my elbow. I want to tell you I was prepared for what Jones showed me. I want to tell you that I'd anticipated the worst and was ready for it, that I'd steeled myself. I wasn't. Here's the thing about Jones that you need to understand before I tell you what he did. His full name is Abel Jones, though nobody at Leon Capital called him Abel, and I suspect he preferred it that way. He is a small man, compact, slightly hunched in the particular way of people who've spent years trying to take up less space in rooms dominated by larger personalities. He'd been Leon's head of communications for 6 years, which as best I can tell meant his actual job was managing the downstream consequences of things Leon said without thinking. Every carelessly worded press, quote, every tone-deaf partner communication, every moment Leon opened his mouth in public, and something regrettable fell out. Jones was the one who swept in afterward with a clarification, a retraction, a carefully worded follow-up that made Leon sound more measured than he had any right to. He was good at it. Probably too good, because Lyon had come to rely on it, the way messy people rely on someone else always cleaning up after them. The assumption being that the cleaning will always happen, that there will always be a Jones. I had met Abel Jones exactly once before that night at an industry conference in Chicago 2 years earlier. We'd shared an elevator for 4 floors, and he'd mentioned he worked at Lion Capital. I'd said I knew of it. He'd said carefully that he admired my funds approach. And there was something in the way he said it, some extra weight behind the compliment, that I'd filed away without knowing exactly why. Cassie mentioned him occasionally, not often and never warmly. He was one of the ones who laughed at Leon's joke in the Monday briefing. She'd said that matter-of-factly, the way she reports things she has already processed and filed under, noted, not forgotten. She didn't hate Jones. She'd simply, clearly, and permanently revised her assessment of who he was. What neither of us knew was that Jones had a daughter, 24 years old, 3 years out of college, working her first serious job at a mid-sized consulting firm downtown. Smart kid, apparently the kind who stays late, not because she has to, but because the problem is still interesting. She told her father over dinner one Sunday about a senior partner at her firm who had started making her Monday mornings uncomfortable. Small things first. A dismissive comment in a meeting. Her ideas attributed to a male colleague 2 days later, as if the original conversation had never happened. Then a joke in front of the team at her expense about whether she'd worn the right outfit to a client lunch. Jones had told me this later, not at the gala. He'd called me 2 weeks after everything broke to explain himself in the way that people sometimes need to explain themselves. Once the adrenaline has gone, and the choice they made starts to feel very large and very permanent, he was quiet on the phone, choosing his words with the same careful precision he'd spent 6 years applying to other people's messes. "I watched it happen to my daughter," he said, "and I told her to keep her head down, to be smart about it, to pick her battles." A pause. "And then I went to work the next day, and I laughed at Lyon's joke," he said when he laughed. Cassie had looked at him for just a moment, not with anger, just with the quiet disappointment of someone recalibrating. And then she looked away. That look, he said, had lived in him for 3 solid weeks. "I've been cleaning up his messes for 6 years, he told me. "I've told myself it was just business, that it wasn't personal, that I was just doing my job." His voice went tight. "But it's always personal for someone, isn't it?" I didn't answer that. It didn't need an answer. So when Jones appeared at my elbow at the gala, I didn't know any of this yet. All I knew was that a small, slightly hunched man was standing at my right shoulder with the look of someone who has been carrying something a long distance and has finally arrived at the place where he can set it down. He glanced around once, then he held out his phone. Low, between our chairs. "Quiet, Mr. Smith," he said. "I think you should see this." I looked at the screen. It was a group chat. Lyon, Callum, and 3 other senior partners. Men whose names I recognized, whose funds I was aware of. One of whom I'd shaken hands with twice at other events. 3 weeks of messages, I read slowly. My jaw tightened somewhere around the 4th scroll. There were photographs of Cassie at her desk, candid ones taken without her knowledge. The angle suggested a phone held low, pointed across the open plan office. There were captions underneath them. I am not going to reproduce those captions here, because they are the kind of thing that once you read them sits in you, like something heavy and sharp, and I have no interest in redistributing that particular weight. I'll tell you only that they were specific in their cruelty, creative in the way that only men who believe they are completely untouchable can manage. There were 3 separate bets logged in the chat. Lyon's original 1,000 bet about the dress. A second bet from Callum about whether she would cry at some point during the evening if she came. A third from a partner named Fredericks about how many sessions of a manufactured performance review it would take before she quit. They had scheduled the performance review. Lyon had sent a calendar invite. I could see the screenshot in the chat titled TS Quarterly Check-In, dated 3 weeks out with a private note. Start building exit documentation. Make it procedural better that way. They had planned with coordination and documentation to push my wife out of her job for correcting a number. I kept scrolling, and then buried about 2/3 down was something that had nothing to do with Cassie at all. Leon and 2 of the partners talking freely the way men talk when they believe they are only among themselves about the structure of a co-investment arrangement. Numbers, representations, the language used to 2 current external partners about what their positions entitled them to. It was different, materially, specifically significantly different from what those partners had been told in writing. I read it twice, a 3rd time. Then I handed the phone back to Jones and kept my voice very, very level. "Can you forward the full thread?" I said, "to an email address I'm going to give you right now." Jones looked at me for a moment, a long moment, the look of a man checking whether he's making the right decision. Then he nodded, took out his own phone, and opened his email. I don't usually do podiums. I want to be honest about this. I write memos. I operate in conference rooms. I ask the question no one else thought to ask and let the answer do the work. Speeches are not my natural habitat. But at 10:15, when the moderator was visibly struggling to bring the evening to a close, Leon had not returned. The keynote had not been completed, and the room had the restless electric energy of 800 wealthy people who witnessed something and have not yet been given permission to fully process it. I leaned over to Cassie. "I'd like to say something," I said. She looked at me, read my face the way she always does, fast and accurate. How bad is it? The chat? Pretty bad. You said, don't make a scene. I said, don't make a scene. She picked up her wine glass, held it for a moment. That was before Jones talked to you. I stood up. The moderator looked so relieved when I approached that I almost felt bad for what I was about to do to his evening. I told him my name. He stepped aside immediately because that's what my name does in rooms like this, and I am usually embarrassed by it. But tonight I was not. The room settled. 800 people. Real money. Old money. The kind of people who can smell significance before it arrives. I gripped the edges of the podium lightly. Most of you know who I am, I said. For those who don't, my name is Liam Smith. I'm a venture capitalist. I've been in this industry for 22 years. And the woman at table 7 in the black dress is my wife, Cassie. She works as a senior financial analyst at Leon Capital. I paused. Let the room absorb the geometry of that. She was invited here tonight as a joke. Silence. The dense kind. Matthew Lyon placed bets, multiple documented bets, with members of his senior team that she would either not show up or embarrass herself if she did. He had members of his staff photograph her at her desk without her knowledge. He had his calendar blocked for a series of performance reviews, which he privately described in writing as the start of building an exit case. All of this because 3 weeks ago in a Monday morning briefing, she raised her hand and corrected an error in his Q3 market estimation. A significant error, the kind that left uncorrected would have caused him meaningful public embarrassment. I looked out at the room. 800 faces still as water. She saved him from that. She did him a professional courtesy. She flagged it quietly, walked him through it, gave him every opportunity to receive it graciously. I let a beat go. This is what he chose to do with it. I excused myself, walked to the small business center off the hotel lobby that every grand hotel has and nobody ever uses, found the attendant, and I printed one page. The most damning one, the partner misrepresentation. The numbers. When I got back to the table, Cassie glanced at my jacket pocket and said nothing. 19 years. She always knows. I set it on the podium and looked out at 800 people. I was in active discussions with Leon Capital about a significant co-investment position in their next major fund round. That will not be happening. A few audible exhales in the room. I've also retained counsel to ensure that the appropriate parties, including certain current partners of Leon Capital, receive documentation of representations made to them about their positions that appear to be materially inconsistent with the terms they agreed to. A murmur. Low and spreading, and not friendly. I want to say one last thing, and then I'll sit back down. I looked toward table 7. Cassie was watching me. That steady look, the one I've relied on for years, the one that means I see you. Go ahead. I have been in this industry for a long time. I have sat across from genuinely extraordinary minds, people who changed what I understood about finance, about risk, about possibility. The sharpest financial intelligence I have ever personally encountered belongs to the woman at table 7 who prefers flats, who loses her reading glasses constantly, who makes a beef stew that will genuinely change your relationship to winter. A ripple of laughter, warm, real. She chose to work under her own name, not mine, because she is the kind of person who insists on building her own thing in her own right without a shortcut. She joined Leon Capital and she did extraordinary work there, and when she caught a mistake, she flagged it carefully and professionally because she was trying to help. I straightened up. Matthew Lyon looked at all of that and saw an opportunity for a joke. I picked up the folded page, held it. I hope it was worth it. I genuinely do, because from where I'm standing, it costs considerably more than $1,000. I stepped back from the podium. The applause started at the back of the room. One person, then 3, then a wave. I walked back to table 7 and sat down next to Cassie. She looked at me for a moment. You made a scene, she said. It was an extremely organized scene. Liam, I used complete sentences. I had documentation. I picked up my wine. That's not a scene. That's a presentation. She put her hand over mine, squeezed once, said nothing else. Behind us, the room was already rearranging itself. 3 separate conversations had started simultaneously at the tables immediately around us, and none of them sounded like good news for Leon Capital's next fundraising cycle. Jones had been sitting on the chat for 2 weeks, he said, unable to decide what to do with it. He had a family. He had a mortgage. He also had, underneath the hunched posture and the 6 years of managing Leon's fallout, a conscience. He sent me the documentation. I had my attorneys review it. The partner representations issue was real and it was serious. The performance review scheme was documented and time-stamped. The photographs of Cassie were well. My attorney used the phrase hostile work environment in a tone that suggested she was being conservative. I told Cassie everything, all of it. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and she read the materials I showed her, and she was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "Okay." Matthew Lyon did not reappear that night. Not to the crowd, not to the moderator, not to the 3 partners who apparently tried to reach him by phone in the hour following my remarks. Callum found me by the coat check at 11, looking like a man whose entire structural understanding of the evening had caved in on him. "Mr. Smith," he said. His voice had a particular quality, the strained precision of someone choosing words the way you choose footholds on a crumbling ledge. If we could arrange a conversation to provide some context for the group chat. He opened his mouth, closed it. "Callum," I picked up Cassie's wrap from the counter. "There isn't a conversation that fixes documented intent. There's attorneys, and there's time, and there's whatever your own counsel advises you. That's where this lives now." He was still standing there, slightly open-mouthed, when I held the door in Cassie and I walked out into the October night. I found out later from someone who'd been on the event staff that Matthew Lyon left the Harrington Grand through the service corridor on the 41st floor at approximately 11:20, coat over his arm. No car service. He'd apparently dismissed the driver earlier in the evening before everything went sideways, intending to leave with a group. He walked out into the city alone through a door that kitchen staff use, like a man who had somewhere urgent to be and no desire at all to be seen getting there. He'd walked in through the grand entrance at 7 o'clock, greeted by name, full room, top of his world. He left through the kitchen. The headline broke 6 days later, not from me. I had said what I had to say in the room where it needed to be said, and I had no interest in feeding a media cycle. It came from a financial reporter named Wright, who had been at the Gala, had watched everything from table 12, had made 17 phone calls in the subsequent week, and had done what good reporters do. The partner misrepresentation story broke first, picked up immediately by 3 major financial publications. The hostile work environment documentation, which Jones ultimately filed formally with considerable professional courage, became a secondary story that grew faster than the first. By day 8, 2 of Lyon's major institutional backers had issued careful, lawyerly public statements about reviewing their positions. By day 12, 3 more had quietly begun the legal mechanics of restructuring their commitments. Fredericks resigned. Callum resigned 8 days after Fredericks, which from where I sit was 7 days too late to matter. The empire didn't fall the way buildings fall. It went the way things go when the foundation was always partially wrought. Not all at once, but piece by piece, withdrawal by withdrawal, statement by statement, until what remained was structurally unrecognizable. Lyon Capital by end of quarter had shed nearly 35% of its managed assets and confirmed withdrawals with more in process. Matthew Lyon himself gave one interview 6 weeks later to a sympathetic outlet that no one significant reads. He said it had been a misunderstanding. He said things had been taken out of context. He looked on screen like a man wearing a suit he used to fit better. I watched 30 seconds of it and turned it off. Cassie got her first serious job offer the week after the gala, a senior role at a fund that had been at the event and had spent the interim doing what funds do when they identify someone they missed. She thanked them and declined. She took 2 months' read aggressively, reorganized our kitchen in a way that is objectively more efficient and yet somehow still disorienting to me every single morning. Went on long walks, sometimes with me, sometimes alone. Cooked elaborate things, thought. And then one morning in December, she came downstairs with a legal pad, sat across from me at the breakfast table and set it in front of me. I read it, sat with it, read it again. It was a fund structure, focused, built around the particular intersection of quantitative modeling and emerging market infrastructure that Cassie had been quietly studying for 3 years. The kind of thing that requires not just intelligence, but a very combination of patience and nerve. The kind of thing that done right would be quietly extraordinary. "I want to start something," she said. "I know. I want to do it clean. My name, my structure." She turned the pad back toward her. "I'll take capital from the right people, not just I know." I pushed the pad back. For what it's worth, from a completely objective analytical standpoint with no personal interest whatsoever, Liam, It's a very good structure. That look. Stop. I'm not doing the face. You're doing the face. I'm doing an objective, professional assessment of a sound. She leaned across the table and kissed me, which ended that particular conversation, which was probably her plan all along. I saw Matthew Lyon once after 6 months later, airport departures level, mid-morning. He was in a suit that was still expensive, but hung slightly differently than suits used to hang on him, the way clothes shift when a person changes shape in ways that have nothing to do with weight. He was alone pulling a carry-on looking at his phone. He looked up, saw me. We were maybe 15 feet apart. He was perfectly still. I was perfectly still for a moment. There was nothing. No expression traded, no gesture, no acknowledgement of all the specific and documented history between us. I thought about saying something, considered it seriously for 2 or 3 seconds. Thought about Cassie eating lunch alone while someone held a phone low and pointed it across the office. Thought about start building exit documentation. Better that way. I picked up my bag. I walked past him without a word. Some things don't require a closing statement. The account is already settled. The numbers are already corrected. He knew that. I knew that. And the knowing of it, I thought as I walked toward my gate, that was probably the part that would stay with him longest. Cassie's fund closed its first round 14 months after the gala. The lead anchor investor, who had been at table 3 that night and had watched the whole thing unfold with his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, called it the most compelling pitch thesis he'd reviewed in 11 years. She wore flats to every single meeting. She lost her reading glasses twice during the final closing dinner. Found them both times in her own bag, which if you know Cassie is practically a miracle. The beef stew is still the best thing I've ever eaten. I still cry at that commercial for the record, but that has nothing to do with anything.